UFC 290 was incredible. From the first fight on the opening prelims to Volk's world-class defense of his title, there was not a single dull moment during the card. There were so many fights, at least 3 or 4, that I thought were locks for fight of the night, but they kept on one-upping each other. I for sure thought Dan Hooker and Jalen Turner secured fight of the night honors, but they were immediately followed up by Moreno and Pantoja in what was quite possibly the fight of the year. Speaking of those fights, Hooker and Moreno both broke bones earlier in those fights and stuck it out to a decision. Brandon broke his hand in the first round and Dan broke his wrist in the second, yet they both stuck in there and won the subsequent round. I don't think it gets any more badass than that. Those two are the definition of warriors. There's a lot to talk about today, so let's dive right into the first topic that I want to touch on, and that is the finishes. There were 4 sub 1 minute finishes in this card. There were 4 of them. There are cards where you won't get 4 finishes during the entire night. This card had 4 finishes within the first minute. We had Jesus Aguilar with a 17-second knockout, Denise Gomez with a strawweight record for fastest finish with a 20-second knockout, Bo Nickel with a 38-second knockout, and best of all, we had Robbie Lawler right off into the sunset with a 38-second knockout, which we'll talk about in a second. On top of these sub-minute finishes, we had an additional 3 KO/TKOs and 2 submissions. 9 out of the 13 fights on this card were finishes, and the ones that weren't were dangerously close to being stopped. And these weren't some boring TKOs either. There were legit one-punch knockouts, beautiful combination setting up finishes, some huge upset finishes, and just every fight that ended violently. Everybody came to fight this card, and they cemented this card as one of the all-time greats. The next thing I want to talk about was the perfect retirement of Robbie Lawler. He is one of the greatest welterweights of all time, and he got a send-off fit for a king. With a UFC career spanning more than 2 decades and coming off of 5 losses in his last 6 fights, Robbie decided that this would be his final fight. He came in as the underdog, a lot of people doubted that he could win this fight, and he blocked out all the noise and put on arguably the greatest performance of the night. He finished Nico Price in 38 seconds with a beautiful combo in the clinch, securing the walk-off knockout for his final fight in the UFC. He put on a vintage Robbie Lawler performance and took no damage in what was his final appearance in the octagon. Then before it was all said and done and his retirement was wrapped up, the UFC presented a beautiful, heartwarming tribute that left us with a grateful and emotional Robbie taking in the magnitude of the moment. I was super happy with the way the UFC treated Robbie, as he is a true legend of the game and deserved no less in his final outing. So glad he was able to end his career on a high note with an almost fairy tale ending. Cheers to retirement, Robbie. I hope you find success in the next chapter of your life. Bo Nickel also had an impressive finish over Val Woodburn, but it's just unfortunate that we didn't get to see him tested in the octagon. His striking looked phenomenal. The way he was bouncing in and out of range and just clipping Woodburn was beautiful, capping off the night with a 30-second knockout. Just sucks that we couldn't see him in there with somebody who had a full training camp and some UFC experience, but there's still no denying how impressive Bo looked. Still should have a couple more fights before the top 15 in my opinion to really gauge where he's at and build up the hype in the process. And props to Val Woodburn for taking that fight on 5 days notice. And it looks like that decision paid off, because at the post-fight presser, Dana let the media know that we will see Val Woodburn in the UFC octagon again in the future. So congrats to Val Woodburn, and props for taking such a tough fight on such short notice, and congratulations to Bo Nickel for the dominant performance. And then we had Dan Hooker and Jalen Turner. Wow. Those two put on what would have been fight of the night on every other card. How they managed to survive the full 15 minutes was beyond me. First round was super competitive. Both fighters had their moments, and I really had no clue how to score that round. Then that second round was ridiculous. I thought Jalen was going to finish him after that beautiful head kick, but Hooker survived the onslaught and started working on an obviously fatigued Turner, nearly finishing with strikes at one point and then being seconds away from a rear naked choke victory before Turner was saved by the bell. That third round began and Jalen decided to go for broke and just put a ridiculous pace on Hooker. But even with a broken wrist that he suffered in the previous round, Hooker held on and put the pressure back on Jalen once he gassed out. Dan Hooker secured the split decision victory and showcased his heart and how tough he truly is. Dan Hooker came into this fight as an underdog to a fight against a monster in Jalen Turner who missed weight. He breaks his hand in the second round, but overcomes all that adversity and secures the split decision win. Props to Dan Hooker, he truly is one of the toughest dudes on the planet. Now moving on to what I believe is the biggest story of the night. Dricus du Plessis upsets Robert Whittaker with a second round TKO. I don't give a damn what you say about how Dricus looked. He finished Robert Whittaker. Nobody finishes Robert Whittaker. That was insanely impressive. We were all wrong about him. For context on how insanely crazy this victory is, no middleweight other than Israel Adesanya has beaten Rob in the UFC, and he's been fighting in the division since 2014. Whittaker went through 2 wars with Yoel Romero and didn't get finished, and Dricus came in as a massive underdog and delivered a brutal finish over Robert Whittaker. Many, including myself, were against this fight. I thought it was so stupid to feed him to Whittaker and eliminate him as a contender because I liked that Izzy fight. I liked the African storyline, I liked the beef they had, and I thought it was all going to be ruined by Whittaker putting a brutal beating on him, but boy was I wrong. Not only did this not ruin the Izzy fight, but it may have just made it 10 times bigger. If they were to forego this Whittaker fight and throw him in there with Adesanya, the odds would be outrageous. Literally nobody would think Dricus would stand a chance. The bout would merely be a marketing opportunity rather than a competitive fight. But he went out there and put a beating on the number 15 pound for pound fighter in the world, and this changes how we have to look at the Izzy fight. Yeah, Dricus may be unorthodox, but it works. And I don't care what anybody says, there is no dismissing the skills and will to win that Dricus possesses. And then that promo with Izzy. I thought that was hilarious. I see everybody hating on it, but I thought that was a fantastic promo. Izzy getting in the cage, taking shots at Dricus for the African controversy, and yelling a choice word over and over. I thought that was hilarious. And then Dricus' reply, "I'm African, but I ain't no brother of yours, son." I thought that was hilarious. That promo was the perfect combination of funny, exciting, and downright cringe. The only thing I didn't like was when Izzy hijacked the last moment on the mic, because I really wanted to hear more from Dricus, but that's the fight game. This will be the easiest fight to market ever. You have a man on pace to be the greatest middleweight of all time, taking on a surging contender who has beat some real fighters. And then there's all this controversy about who's the real African. I really hope that Dricus can make this 9-week turnaround and get in there with Izzy for UFC 293, because I want nothing more than to witness the lead up to this fight and the fight itself. And best of all, we have a new mythical fighter, Oxygenated du Plessis. Moving on to Moreno versus Pantoja, and oh my god, is there a lot to talk about here. Everybody knows how incredible that fight was, so there's no need for me to come in and beat a dead horse. They both went to war for 5 rounds, but ultimately, Pantoja came out on top with a split decision win. What I want to talk about is where do we go from here? Brandon Moreno just came off of his quadrilogy with Figueiredo, and the flyweight division that was held up for so long finally had a chance to move on. But now we have another possible quadrilogy on our hands after Pantoja defeated Moreno, and I'm sure contenders in the division are not happy about it. Let's look at everything we have to consider here. We have contenders like Brandon Royval, Amir Albazi, and Kai Kara France who haven't gotten a shot at undisputed gold due to the quadrilogy that took place over the last 3 years. It would seem ridiculous that after 3 straight rematches for the title, the UFC would decide to do another rematch. Plus, you have to consider the fact that Moreno has had 5 straight undisputed title fights and has only won 2 of them. Kind of seems a little unwarranted to throw him back in there for a 6th straight undisputed title shot. Then you have to consider the fact that Pantoja has already beat him 3 times. I understand that one was an exhibition on The Ultimate Fighter, but he still beat him and then went on to beat him 2 more times. With all of these things considered, it seems unfair to the rest of the division to throw Brandon Moreno right back into a title fight. Now, the other side of the coin is that this was quite possibly the fight of the year. I mean, there was non-stop action in this fight. The pace that these two put on from the opening bell was out of this world. If you told me after that first round that this was going to go to the distance, I would have laughed at you. But these two stuck it out and went to war for 5 full rounds. They put on a goddamn show for us. I really don't think there's a fight fan on the planet that doesn't want to see these guys go at it again. Plus, Brandon Moreno is undoubtedly one of the best flyweights on the planet and deserves to be in the title conversation for that reason alone. Regardless, this is a super tough situation for the division, and there really is no right answer. Let me know what you guys think about this situation in the comments below. Now moving on to the main event, is there any featherweight on the planet that can stand in there with Volk? I really don't think so. He looked unbeatable last night. He came to this fight as a sizable favorite, but I don't think there was anybody that thought he was going to make it look as easy as he made it look last night. He looked like a bully in there. He was able to control the distance, find takedowns, and just put a beating on Yair on the ground. We saw some of the flashiness of Yair last night, but he didn't look like he usually does because he had Volk in front of him last night. Even after getting cracked, Volk wasn't afraid to stay on the feet with Yair and ultimately set up a finish off of a mean right hand that he landed on the feet. The way he finished that fight, swarming him against the fence, then just dumping him and establishing some brutal ground and pound, was so dominant. He looked like a world beater last night. We're getting to the point where we have to look past the featherweight GOAT conversation and start looking at the overall GOAT status. Now, I'm not saying that he's the GOAT right now or that he's top 3, but oh boy is he close. If he can move up to lightweight and get that strap too, it's going to be hard to deny him in that GOAT conversation. Now, I'm not sure if he'll ever surpass Jon Jones or even GSP for that matter, but you'd be a fool to say that he doesn't have a chance. Speaking of moving up, what's next for Volk? He mentioned that he needs surgery, but it doesn't seem too serious and he still wants to fight by the end of the year. Are we thinking Ilya, or do we want to see that highly anticipated rematch with Islam? Either option is great in my opinion, but it seems like Islam vs Oliveira 2 is going to be next, so it's more likely that we're going to see Volk vs Ilya. The only problem though is that Volk vs Islam was far more competitive than the Charles Islam fight, and Volk seems like he's too much for any featherweight to handle right now. Although Ilya has looked fantastic in his career, few can look fantastic against Volk, so I'm not sure how I like his chances in that fight. He's an incredible boxer and has a fantastic ground game, but Volk just looks unbeatable. I'd like to see the rematch between Volk and Islam, but I also think that Charles deserves the rematch as well. It's a tough situation for everybody, but I have faith that the UFC will be able to figure this all out. I'm still not over how amazing this card was, and I'm sure that I'll find time later this week to watch it all again from top to bottom. It's hard to imagine that another card this year could top what we saw at UFC 290, but on paper, we have another card later this month that has potential to be the card of the year. I'm so excited for UFC 291, but in the meantime, while we're waiting, I'm going to reflect on what we just saw and appreciate the greatness that we just witnessed. Thank you all for watching this video. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more MMA content, and please be sure to follow us on all of our social medias linked in the description below. Thank you all, and I'll see you all next time.